Captain Elias Vance adjusted the ship's controls, his fingers flying over the holographic interface as his freighter, the Argonaut, sailed through the dense asteroid belt of Sector 45R. The cargo bay was packed with industrial plasma cores destined for the mining colonies on Vega Prime. It was supposed to be a routine delivery. That's when the distress signal came. "Lumi," Elias said to his AI co-pilot, "what's the origin of that signal?" The AI's voice was crisp and professional. "Unknown, Captain. Signal is on an unregistered frequency. Origin appears to be a planetary fragment in orbit around the red dwarf star, X11b. Elias sighed. "Unregistered usually means trouble. Could be pirates. Could be a trap. Or," Lumi added, "it could be a legitimate distress call. Probability analysis suggests a 22% chance of survivors." Elias frowned. Against his better judgment, he turned the ship toward the signal. He might have been a freighter captain, but he wasn't one to leave someone stranded. Within minutes, the barren fragment of a planet came into view, a jagged wasteland of blackened rock. The signal led him to a small, half-destroyed ship crumpled against the edge of a canyon. "Atmosphere is thin but breathable," Lumi reported. "I'll keep the engines warm in case of hostiles." Grabbing his sidearm, Elias disembarked, the hiss of his boots hitting the dusty surface breaking the silence. The wreckage looked ancient, the metal corroded and scorched. He carefully stepped through the rubble until he found her. She was slumped against the wall of the broken ship, her violet skin glowing faintly under the dim light of the red dwarf. Her appearance was unmistakably alien tall, with elongated limbs, luminous white hair, and shimmering iridescent markings across her skin. Her breathing was shallow, her golden eyes fluttering open as he approached. "Help! Me," she rasped, her voice tinged with desperation and something else defiance. Elias knelt beside her, his instincts kicking in. "Easy there. Who are you?" "Zarella," she managed. "There. Coming." "Who's coming?" Elias pressed, but her strength failed, and she fell unconscious. Back on the Argonaut, Elias stabilized her condition. Lumi analyzed her physiology, remarking on her tenebrae origin. Her kind rarely travel alone. Most are connected to a hive mind known as the collective thought. She appears to be severed from it. As Elias tried to piece together her story, an imposing cruiser dropped out of hyperspace, its sleek design bristling with weaponry. A voice boomed over his comms. "This is Enforcer Commander Zyler of the Tribunal of the Accord. You are harboring a fugitive. Surrender her immediately, or be destroyed." Elias's heart sank. He had unknowingly stepped into a political quagmire. Tribunal? What's she wanted for? "Her crime is rebellion against the collective thought," Zyler replied coldly. "Her continued existence is a threat to galactic stability. Surrender her now." Elias glanced at Zarella, still unconscious on the mid-bay table. He could leave her to her fate and save himself, but something about the Tribunal's tone felt wrong. "Define rebellion," he said, stalling for time. She refused to merge her consciousness with the collective, choosing individuality over unity, Zyler said with disdain. "Such heresy cannot be tolerated." Elias's jaw tightened. He didn't know much about Zarella, but he knew oppression when he saw it. Without answering, he made a split-second decision. "Lumi," he said, "power up the hyperdrive." "Captain," Lumi warned, "this course of action will escalate dash." "I know what it'll do." Elias snapped. "Just do it." The Argonaut roared to life, and Elias sent the ship into a reckless dive through the cruiser's blockade. Energy blasts lit up the void around him as he barely escaped into hyperspace. When Zarella finally woke, she was safe for the moment. She looked at Elias with a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "Why? Why did you save me?" she asked weakly. Elias shrugged, his tone gruff. "Because what they're doing to you isn't right." "Now, who the hell are you really?" And why do they want you dead? Zarilla's lips trembled as she sat up, her gaze distant. Because I chose to be free. And in their eyes, that makes me dangerous. Elias leaned back in his chair, staring at her. He didn't know it yet, but saving Zarilla had just made him a fugitive too and set him on a collision course with the most powerful force in the galaxy. The Argonaut hummed with tension as it slipped through the thin threads of hyperspace, its hull groaning under the stress of the hasty jump. Captain Elias Vance sat in the cockpit, his hand still gripping the controls tightly. Zarilla was resting in the mid-bay, her breathing stabilized thanks to the ship's rudimentary medical systems. Lumi, his ever-pragmatic AI co-pilot, appeared in holographic form beside him. Captain, Lumi began, her tone as calm as ever despite the chaos they'd just escaped. We have successfully evaded the Tribunal enforcer, but their ships are equipped with subspace trackers. It's only a matter of time before they reacquire our location. Elias sighed and leaned back in his chair. How much time are we talking? Approximately 9 hours, depending on how aggressively they pursue. He ran a hand through his unkempt hair. 9 hours wasn't much. Then we need a plan. And fast. Lumi's hologram flickered as she brought up a star map. The nearest safe harbor is the Icaron Rift. The gravitational anomalies will make tracking us more difficult, but it's also a known refuge for smugglers and bounty hunters. Elias didn't like the sound of that, but he liked being captured even less. Set a course. And keep an eye on our guest. In the mid-bay, Zarilla stirred. Her violet skin shimmered faintly under the soft lighting, her golden eyes fluttering open. Elias entered just as she sat up, clutching her side. Her movements were weak but deliberate. You shouldn't be moving, Elias said, handing her a cup of nutrient broth. Zarilla took the cup with a slight nod, her hands trembling. I've had worse. Elias pulled up a chair across from her. All right, now that you're not dying on my floor, let's talk. What did you do to make the Tribunal want you dead? Zarilla hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cup. I was born into the collective thought, like all Tenebrae. We are one mind, one purpose. But I didn't want to lose myself. I refused the merging. Elias frowned. And that's a death sentence? To them, yes, Zarilla said bitterly. Individuality is a disease, a threat to their control. They fear anyone who resists. Elias leaned back, his gaze narrowing. Sounds more like tyranny than unity. It is, she said quietly. But the collective isn't just a political entity, it's a living, breathing organism. They see my mind as a cancer, something to be excised before it spreads. Her words hung heavy in the air. Elias didn't fully understand what it meant to defy something as pervasive as the collective thought, but he knew enough to recognize injustice when he saw it. So what now? Elias asked. You think you can outrun them forever? No, Zarilla admitted. But I can't stop fighting either. Not while I still have my mind. Elias studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. I'm not just going to hand you over to them. We'll figure something out. She looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. Why? You don't even know me. Elias shrugged. Maybe I'm just tired of people thinking they can play God. 9 hours later. The Icaron Rift was as dangerous as Lumi had warned. The swirling clouds of plasma and debris made navigation treacherous, and the faint signals of other ships in the area were a constant reminder of the rift's reputation. Lumi, Elias said, gripping the controls tightly, keep scanning for anything unusual. We don't need surprises right now. Understood, Captain, Lumi replied. In the co-pilot's chair, Zarilla had insisted on helping despite her weakened state. She studied the ship's systems with a curious intensity. Your ship? It's old, but functional. Human design? Yeah, it's seen better days, Elias said. But it's gotten me out of more scrapes than I can count. I can help, Zarella said suddenly. My nanotech can enhance the Argonaut systems. It might give us an edge if the Tribunal finds us. Elias hesitated. Won't that take a toll on you? Zarella nodded. Yes. But I'd rather drain myself than let them catch us. Elias frowned, torn between accepting her help and protecting her. Before he could decide, the ship's alarms blared. Captain, Lumi said urgently, we've been detected. Tribunal enforcers are entering the rift. Elias swore under his breath. How many? 2 warships and 3 interceptors, Lumi replied. Their weapon systems are locking onto us. Zarella stood, her golden eyes blazing with determination. Let me link with the ship. I can boost your shields and engines. No time to argue, Elias said. Do it. Zarella pressed her palm against the console, and her iridescent markings began to glow. The ship's systems flared to life, the engines roaring with newfound power. Elias could feel the difference immediately as the Argonaut surged forward, weaving through the chaotic terrain of the rift. The enforcers pursued relentlessly, their weapons tearing through the plasma clouds. Zarella's connection to the ship was pushing her to the brink, sweat pouring down her face as she channeled her nanotech. They're gaining, Lumi warned. Elias gritted his teeth. Not for long. He guided the ship toward a dense cluster of debris, using the terrain to his advantage. With Zarella's enhancements, the Argonaut outmaneuvered the larger warships, darting through tight spaces that the enforcers couldn't follow. When the last of the interceptors veered off, Elias finally allowed himself to breathe. Status, Lumi? Pursuit ships are out of range, Lumi reported. We are safe for now. Elias glanced at Zarella, who had collapsed into the co-pilot's chair, her glow dimmed. You okay? I'll recover, she said weakly. Elias nodded, admiration flickering in his eyes. Good. Because something tells me this is just the beginning. The barren, storm-ridden planet where the Argonaut landed was a desolate outpost on the edge of the Icaron Rift. Elias guided the freighter into a narrow canyon for cover, its engines sputtering as they powered down. The brief respite from the Tribunal's pursuit had bought them time, but not much. Zarella sat slumped in the co-pilot's chair, her skin a duller shade of violet, her breathing shallow. Her connection to the ship had drained her nanotech reserves, leaving her visibly weaker. Elias crouched beside her, offering her a canister of water. Drink, he said gruffly. You look like you just went 10 rounds with a supernova. She chuckled weakly, the sound more like a rasp. Feels worse. Elias hesitated. What exactly did you do to my ship back there? It felt like we were flying on overdrive. Zarella sipped the water slowly, then explained. My body is infused with living nanotechnology. Every tenebrae has it to some degree. It lets us interface with machines, adapt to environments, even heal faster. But it's not infinite. Using it like I did burns through my energy. Too much, and... Her voice trailed off, but the implication was clear. Elias leaned back, running a hand through his hair. So you're telling me you're a walking miracle machine, but it's killing you every time you use it? It's not a miracle, Zarella said bitterly. It's a tool. One the collective thought would make us better servants. They didn't expect someone like me to use it to defy them. Her words carried the weight of a lifetime of rebellion, and Elias felt a pang of respect for her. He nodded toward the viewport, where the canyon's jagged cliffs loomed in the fading light. We're not staying here long. The Tribunal's ships will sweep this sector soon enough. Any ideas? Zarella closed her eyes, her exhaustion palpable. The only way to stop them is to disable their psychic network. As long as it's active, they'll always find me. And how do we do that? Elias asked, his tone sharp. Because I don't see a big red button labeled off. There isn't one, she admitted. The network is controlled from a central hub on the Tribunal's flagship. If I could interface with it, I could corrupt the signal, severing their connection. Elias's eyes narrowed. That sounds like a suicide mission. It is, Zarella said bluntly. But it's the only way. A shared resolve. Elias paced the cramped confines of the Argonaut, his mind racing. He wasn't one for heroics, but the thought of handing Zarella over to the Tribunal, of letting her be erased, made his blood boil. Lumi's holographic form materialized, her expression as calm as ever. Captain, while I am obligated to advise against reckless action, I have calculated that Zarella's plan has a 32% probability of success. That's it? Elias asked, stopping mid-stride. Against a fleet of Tribunal warships and an advanced psychic network, yes, Lumi said. However, your history suggests that you have thrived on worse odds. Thanks for the vote of confidence, Elias muttered. He glanced back at Zarella, who was resting in the mid-bay. Her defiance, even in the face of impossible odds, stirred something in him, a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. He returned to the mid-bay and pulled up a chair beside her. We'll do it your way, he said. But we're not going in blind. If we're taking on the Tribunal, we're going to need a plan. And backup. Zarella's eyes opened, a flicker of surprise in her golden gaze. Backup? I know some people, Elias said. They're not exactly upstanding citizens, but they hate the Tribunal as much as you do. Maybe more. She nodded slowly. Then we should contact them. If this works, it won't just save me, it could inspire others to resist. Elias smirked. You're starting to sound like a revolutionary. Zarella's lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe I am. The ghosts of the past. Elias's contacts were scattered across the galaxy, mercenaries, smugglers, and former soldiers who had been wronged by the Tribunal in one way or another. Using the ship's secure comms, he sent out a distress signal to an old ally, Cale Renshaw, a grizzled ex-pilot with a grudge against the Tribunal that ran as deep as his love for high-stakes risks. Cale's face appeared on the screen moments later, his grizzled beard and mischievous grin as familiar as ever. Elias Vance. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. Last time, you left me holding the bag on Vega Station. I've got a job for you, Cale, Elias said without preamble. And it's big. Cale raised an eyebrow. Bigger than outrunning a Tribunal blockade with a freighter full of illegal plasma cores? Much bigger, Elias said. I need to hit the Tribunal where it hurts. Their flagship. Cale's grin faded, replaced by a look of concern. You're serious? Dead serious. After a long pause, Cale nodded. All right. But this better be worth it. Preparing for battle. Over the next 2 days, Cale and his crew arrived in a battered frigate called the Ironclad, bringing with them a ragtag group of rebels and smugglers. Zarella's story quickly galvanized the group, her defiance of the collective inspiring a shared sense of purpose. Using Cale's knowledge of Tribunal ship layouts and Zarella's nanotech expertise, they devised a daring plan. The Argonaut and the Ironclad would infiltrate the flagship under the guise of a disabled transport. Once inside, Zarella would make her way to the network hub, while Elias and Cale provided cover. As they prepared for the mission, Zarella found a moment alone with Elias. Thank you, she said softly. For risking everything. Elias shrugged. Don't thank me yet. We haven't won. We will, she said with quiet determination. Because you believe in me. That's more than anyone else ever has. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the weight of their situation faded. They were just two beings fighting for survival and maybe something more. Elias broke the silence. Get some rest. We've got a Tribunal flagship to crash. Zarella smiled faintly. Let's give them hell. The Argonaut and the Ironclad emerged from hyperspace on the edge of the Tribunal fleet's formation. The flagship, Judgment Eternal, Loomed in the distance a massive structure of gleaming obsidian, its surface alive with glowing patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the collective's psychic network. It was both a fortress and a symbol of their absolute control. Elias stood at the helm of the Argonaut, his jaw set as he surveyed the looming battle ahead. Beside him, Zarilla adjusted her gear, her violet skin regaining some of its luminescence. She had pushed herself to her limits preparing for this moment, her resolve hardening with each passing hour. Kale's voice crackled over the comms. "We're in position, Elias. You sure about this?" "There's no turning back." Elias gripped the controls tightly. "We've come this far. Let's make it count." The plan hinged on deception. The Argonaut, rigged to emit a distress signal, drifted toward the flagship, appearing as a damaged vessel requesting aid. The ironclad trailed at a safe distance, ready to intervene if things went sideways. As expected, the flagship's defense systems scanned the ship but allowed it to dock in one of its lower hangars. The Tribunal was overconfident, believing their psychic network made them untouchable. Zarilla, Elias, and a small team of Kale's crew disembarked quickly, disguising themselves as maintenance workers. Zarilla's nanotech allowed her to bypass the hangar's security systems, granting them access to the interior corridors. The flagship's design was as unnerving as its exterior, sleek and minimalist, with walls that seemed to hum with the latent energy of the collective. The psychic network's influence was palpable, like a low-pressure wave pressing against their minds. "This place gives me the creeps," Kale muttered, his blaster ready. "You sure you can handle this, Zarilla?" She nodded, her golden eyes glowing faintly. "I can feel the network pulling at me. But it's nothing I haven't resisted before." Elias put a hand on her shoulder. "We've got your back." The network hub The team reached the central network hub without incident, thanks to Zarilla's ability to manipulate the ship's systems. The hub was a massive, circular chamber filled with pulsating conduits that carried the psychic energy of the collective. At its center was a crystalline core, glowing with an otherworldly light. Zarilla stepped forward, her expression steely. "This is it. Once I connect, I'll have a limited window to corrupt the network before they overwhelm me." "Just tell us what you need," Elias said. "Keep them off me," she replied simply. She placed her hands on the crystalline core, her iridescent markings flaring to life as she began the interface. The room erupted in a storm of light and sound as the network reacted violently to her intrusion. Alarms blared, and the walls seemed to vibrate with the anger of the collective. The first wave of enforcers arrived almost immediately, heavily armed, insectoid beings with unnervingly precise movements. Kale's crew opened fire, holding the line as Zarilla worked. Elias stayed close to her, his blaster taking down any enforcer that got too close. "How's it going?" Elias shouted over the chaos. Zarilla's voice was strained. "I'm in, but it's fighting me. The collective. It's trying to overwrite my mind." "Stay with me, Zarilla," Elias yelled, his tone fierce. "You're stronger than they are." Her body trembled as the psychic energy coursed through her. The crystalline core began to flicker, the light within dimming as Zarilla's corruption spread through the network. The turning point. The enforcers kept coming, their numbers seemingly endless. The room became a battlefield, smoke and sparks filling the air as the rebels fought desperately to buy Zarilla more time. Elias was reloading his blaster when a sudden, deafening voice filled the chamber. It was not spoken but broadcast directly into their minds, a deep, collective roar that seemed to shake their very souls. "You cannot defy us. You are nothing. Submit." Elias gritted his teeth, fighting off the oppressive mental force. "Is that the best you've got?" he growled. Zarilla screamed, her body convulsing as the collective tried to crush her will. Her voice rang out, defiant and fierce. "I am not nothing. I am me." The crystalline core cracked, its light sputtering as Zarilla's corruption reached its peak. The collective's presence faltered, the oppressive weight lifting slightly. But the effort had taken its toll. Zarella collapsed, her markings dimmed and her breathing ragged. Elias caught her before she hit the ground. Zarella, stay with me. She opened her eyes weakly, her voice barely audible. It's done. The room trembled as the network began to collapse, the conduits sparking and exploding. The collective's control over the ship was unraveling. The escape. Kale's voice crackled over the comms. Elias, the ship's coming apart. We need to move, now. Elias hoisted Zarella over his shoulder and led the retreat, blasting any enforcers that crossed their path. The team made it back to the hangar just as the Argonaut powered up, its engines roaring to life. Kale and his crew provided covering fire as Elias and Zarella boarded the ship. Punch it, Lumi! Elias shouted. The Argonaut blasted out of the hangar just as the flagship erupted in a cascade of explosions. The psychic network's destruction sent shockwaves through the collective, their influence faltering across the fleet. A new dawn. Hours later, in the safety of deep space, Elias sat by Zarella's side in the mid-bay. She was still weak but alive, her golden eyes filled with quiet determination. You did it, Elias said. You broke their hold. Zarella managed a faint smile. It's not over. But now, others will have a chance. News of the Tribunal's flagship's destruction spread quickly, sparking uprisings across the galaxy. Species long oppressed by the collective began to rise, inspired by Zarella's defiance and Elias's refusal to back down. As the galaxy shifted, Elias looked at Zarella and realized she had given him something too, a cause worth fighting for. Together, they were more than fugitives. They were a spark in the dark, a reminder that even the most powerful oppressors could be challenged. And the galaxy would never be the same.